All right, welcome back to Making the Argument. Today, we're going to be going over the top policies which sound really good but never seem to work as advertised. And what I mean by that is there are any number of times where politicians, government officials, whatever it is, get up there and they push a particular idea, and their marketing is glorious. I mean, it's great. They've got everyone convinced that this is going to solve all your problems. This is going to eradicate whatever issue is troubling you or holding you back or is keeping you from everything that you want. And then when it gets implemented, lo and behold, doesn't quite seem to pan out. So we're going to go over some of these today. And I'm going to tell you right now, some of the issues that we're going to talk about and explain why they don't work are actually pretty popular. But if you hang around, I promise you, we're going to give you some really good reasons, as well as maybe some alternatives to achieve similar things without giving politicians way more power than they need or deserve. All of that and more coming up in this episode of Making the Argument, brought to you by Good Ranchers.
If you're watching on YouTube, you might see that we have a new camera angle because some of you have asked that you get a studio shot. So here it is. You can kind of see where we're at and see where everybody's sitting. But anyway, if you haven't already, go down to the link in the description, go to our community chat, sign up there for us, and get to know everybody in our community. We're approaching 1,500 members, which is pretty freaking awesome. We're pretty happy to see that, and I'm sure we're going to be covering some of the topics that folks have given us in the episode ideas channel as well in this episode. So let's get right into it.
All right, as always, I'm your host, Nick Freitas, and for the purposes of this podcast, I will mention that I do have a little bit of experience in the horrible, disgusting world of politics and government policy.
Very recent experience.
Very recent experience, as it turns out. As always, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees, is here.
Hello, everyone.
Then we have our political prognosticator and resident historian, Master Hines.
Wait, you just left it at that? You didn't explain to the audience what that recent experience was?
No.
Everybody, he is a lawmaker in our state in Virginia. There's new people that listen to us every day that might not know that.
But other than that, I'm a good person.
Yes, Nick he's
a
a filthy politician, but other than that, he's a good person.
You are one of the few politicians that do not present yourself as the solution.
Oh, no. Me and my colleagues are definitely the problem.
That's my job. I present him as the solution.
And then, of course, we have our producer of producers, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through some of these, and we've got a list here. And we're going to go back and forth between Christian and Tina, and they're going to bring up a list of one of these good-sounding ideas, and we're going to try to get through as many of them as we possibly can. But I've got a time limit. I think we're shooting for, 10 minutes per issue?
10 minutes.
10 minutes per issue, and I, along with my esteemed co-host here, have to convince you that the real reason why some of these things don't work as advertised is not because evil, greedy corporations or individuals or white rural rage is preventing them from working as intended, but instead that there's actually very, very, again, logical, fundamental reasons why these policies not just don't work, and not because the right people haven't been in charge, but because ultimately they don't really work with reality. All right, so we got this list. Christian's going to go first. Christian, what is the first topic we're going to hit?
Nick, I just want to clarify to the audience, Nick does not know which ones Tina and I are going to pick.
I mean, I know what the list is.
He knows what the general list is, but he doesn't know which ones we're going to pick, so he's kind of going off the fly.
Yeah, because we got like 16 here, and we only have
we have time for like 8.
Oh, no.
Tops.
I'm going to say 5.
Okay, 5. All right.
At the end of the episode, you guys can say, was Tina right? I think 5 is what we're going to end up with.
First one that we're going to go with, and again, he doesn't really know that I'm going to pick this one, but I think it's going to come up as a big issue this election cycle, which is student loan forgiveness. It sounds like a great idea, right? You have all these people like me. I paid off my student loan, so I get screwed if this happens.
Sucker.
But other people who aren't like me, maybe they're a little bit younger, have thousands, tens of thousands, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. And doesn't it just make sense that, with income inequality at all-time highs and millennials and Zoomers are getting locked out of the housing market in part because they're having to make these payments. It just makes sense, doesn't it?
And it's the one type of loan you can't file bankruptcy and get some sort of relief from, right? It's like once you're stuck with it, you're stuck with it. No, I mean, the argument for student loan, and this is the way it's marketed, right? You've got all of these students, and we told them, go off, get a degree. They took out the loans. They tried hard. They got their degree, and now they can't get a good job in order to pay back the loans, or paying back the loans is standing in the way of them being able to get a home, being able to, even buy groceries, move along with their life, move out of their house. And obviously that's what we want, right? So if we just take away this one burden, right, which the government is the one holding the loans, right? If we just take away this one burden, it's going to free up all of this money for them to be able to spend in the economy and buy houses. And that's going to, hinge on economic development and all these positive things. So why wouldn't you do it?
I want to bring up one more argument that I've heard pop up a couple times, which is, well, the government already, quote unquote, bails out people all the time, right?
Yeah.
If you're old enough, you remember the 2008, 2009 bailouts.
Yeah.
The government bailed out banks, Detroit, bailed out banks, bailed out Wall Street. More recently, it was a year ago this month that the government bailed out Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah.
And the depositor, it wasn't the bank, it was the depositors of the bank that got the bailout.
Sure.
So if the government's willing to bail out all these special interests because they're too big to fail, or these mega investors to this, high-tech bank in Silicon Valley, why can't they bail out, ordinary college students that have $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in student loan debt?
I just have a quick question before we move forward. Do we know why student loans are the only debt that can't be forgiven, or why the government set it up that way?
I mean, I think they set it up that way in part to sell the idea that this wasn't something that they were just going to, automatically forgive, or that people could just default on and get away with. But
it's probably how they got it to be bipartisan.
Another reason why is because there's no collateral that could be seized, because it's an education. Whereas if you default on a home loan, you lose the house.
You lose property.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so why wouldn't we do it? Well, first of all, let's talk about the marketing aspect of this. The government is going to forgive student loan debt. They can't. I don't mean like legally they're not permitted to. I mean in reality, in the world of reality, right? You can't. All you can do is transfer the debt onto somebody else that didn't take out the loan. There's only one person that can genuinely forgive in the sense that we generally accept that term. And that is if I loan you money and you say, hey man, I'm in a hard situation, or I'm just, I decide that I want to forgive it. Okay, I can forgive that because it's my money. But even then, all I really did was I transferred the responsibility for paying off the loan from you to me. But I can do that because I'm the one that loaned it to you in the first place, right? There's nothing immoral about that. It could be, maybe it's a good decision, maybe it's a bad decision, but nothing immoral. But when the government does it, what they're saying is they're like, hey, all you people that took out college loans, right? And you use those loans and the university got their money. And by the way, the universities love to lobby for federally subsidized student loans. They also like to lobby for direct subsidization of universities, but that's a different story, right? They got their cut. The professors, the administrators, they got their cut, right? And now what they're saying is, oh my gosh, look at these students in this horrible situation. And now the government is saying, we're going, okay, great. So the way we're going to solve it is we're going to take all the people that didn't pay the loan. You're now responsible for paying it. So you either paid off your student loans, or you're a plumber, or you're an architect, or you're a doctor, or whatever it is, and you didn't take out this loan to go to college. But now it's your responsibility to pay it, right? Because it's not the government, it's taxpayers. Government doesn't have any of its own money. It takes it, it borrows it, or it prints it. And so the principle that you're setting up is that the government, and it doesn't matter who it does it to. The government shouldn't be bailing out businesses. The government shouldn't be bailing out banks. It shouldn't be doing any of that. But it also shouldn't be bailing out this. So the first problem is that there's something immoral about telling someone that, hey, I know you didn't take out a loan, but now you're responsible for paying it. Well, why? Well, because they're having trouble. Well, hell, I'm having trouble. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You apparently don't have the same political pull that these people over here do, or you're not as sympathetic a use case, right? So that's the first step. It's just wrong. It is immoral to tell somebody that didn't take out the loan that they're now responsible for paying for a loan that somebody else took out. Secondly, it produces horrible incentives. So if you're a student, you took out this loan and you have an obligation to pay it back because that's what you do when you take out a loan, but you see that the government is advocating not paying or not forcing you to pay back those loans, well, what's the incentive for you to pay off your loan, right? And in the future, is this going to happen again? Are we going to create more situations where there's more loans given by the taxpayers, not by the government, by taxpayers?
Right, because it's not like we're forgiving the loan and then no longer doing student
Oh, no.
loans.
They continue to do it.
Right.
Or they'll do like, well, we're going to do a one-time forgiveness. Oh, really?
Yeah, really, one time.
And what's so interesting about this happening right now is, let's say, for instance, that the Biden administration was able to do this. in 2024. They would be executing this plan at the point in time where companies have started to give less value to a diploma.
Yes.
And then they would be incentivizing more generations going through the college system. And how many people would waste 4 years of their life, maybe not waste it, but that is time they could be spending in other areas.
Well, the other
you talk about incentivization, yeah.
No, you're right. And the other problem too is it also creates a perverse incentive for universities, because now universities are not openly competing on the marketplace the same way that other industries have to, because they're getting direct subsidization from the government, and now they're getting these really easy to get federal college loans, which again they get the benefit from.
Right.
The head of DEI at UVA makes over $500,000 a year.
Wow.
You want to know where your tuition is going to? You want to know where a lot of these, these student loan forgiveness is going to? It's going to that. And so again, it creates perverse, it's immoral in the first place. It creates perverse incentives for the student. It creates perverse incentives for the university, and even the economic benefits they claim that will take place from this, right? They say, okay, I loaned you money, you didn't pay it back, I'm going to forgive it. Now you have money to spend on other things. Well, wait a second. What about the money that got spent on the university? Now I have to pay it off through my taxes, right? So now you're taking more of my money that would have gone to the things that what you're doing is you're giving preferential treatment to the person that defaults on their college loans over the person that is not defaulting on their college loans.
Right.
So economically, it doesn't make sense. Morally, it doesn't make sense. From an incentive structure, it doesn't make sense. It may sound really good to the people struggling to pay off their loans right now, but you are setting a horrible precedent going forward.
One last question on this. If student loan forgiveness were to take place right now, would the government use taxpayer money directly that had just been paid to the IRS to do that, or would they have to print money to forgive those loans?
So, it's a good question. What they usually say, and you'll have some people claim that, well, no, it's not that the government does it. It's these companies that give the loans, and they'll be on the hook. It's like, no, they won't, because the government's the one that insured the loan. So if the government is saying we're going to forgive it, the government's still on the hook. Now, the question is how will the government pay for that? Well, again, 3 ways. They can tax it, they can borrow it, they can print it, right? We're already in an inflationary economy right now. So again, how they pay that off, I'm not really sure, but no matter what it is, taxpayers ultimately are on the hook, because you're either taxed for it, or when they borrow it, they're borrowing it from some taxpayers and then paying interest on it. Right. Or when they print it, it causes inflation, and that hurts all taxpayers. So
it does seem like default on a loan sends a really necessary signal that wouldn't be sent otherwise.
Yes.
And that is, this is a garbage degree, and perhaps some of these colleges need to stop offering degrees that are useless to the people who are taking out loans to get them.
Well,
and the colleges just simply don't get that message if they're bailed out.
You are absolutely right. That's another one of the perverse incentives that go to the universities. But see, when loans are handled in the private sector, when the private sector gives you a loan to go to college, here's what they want to know. How'd you do in high school? Mm-hmm. How do you plan to do, have you gotten in trouble or anything like that? What's the probability that you have the academic prowess to actually complete and what's your degree? And if your degree is, well, I really want to go into lesbian dance theory, chances are you are not getting a private loan for that. But the federal government will be happy to give you a loan to go and study abroad and do all this other stuff. So again, it creates a perverse incentive, because the university just wants their money.
Right. So there's a lot that can be done to sort of, even without getting rid of student loans programs altogether, there's a lot that could be done to fix the student loan program that I don't think will happen if they just simply get bailed out.
No. All right, what's the next? All right, Tina, you pick the next one.
That was just a quick announcement. That was 7 minutes. We didn't even go to 10.
Wow, look at that.
I'm so surprised. Okay, well, let's go ahead with, I've got a couple that really stand out for me. But let's go ahead and go for reparations, since that there are several places that are really pushing that right now at the more local and state levels. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and talk about reparations.
So here's the interesting part with reparations. So obviously, for those who don't know, which I think most people do, but reparations is the idea that we are paying people back for the consequences with respect to slavery, and you could also make an argument for genuine systemic racism that appeared in the law. So we're talking about like Jim Crow laws and things like that. So when we talk about systemic, or other forms of discrimination, you can make an argument when people say systemic racism. There was very much systemic racism, and you could argue that it was legal racism with things like Jim Crow, but then you can also argue that various corporations or companies had policies which also directly discriminated based off of things like race or sex or whatever else it might be. And so the argument goes for, because people financially benefited as a result of these policies, either through slave labor, obviously, right, or by some form of repression, that compensation is owed. The compensation is owed for that unpaid labor. And again, I think most of us are sympathetic to that argument on some level. The problem with reparations as they're currently presented, it's the idea of, okay, none of the people who were directly affected by the offense are alive, right? We're talking about several generations when we're talking about slavery now. None of them are directly alive. None of the people that actually committed the act for which you would secure the resources for the reparations are alive. And so you run into this real problem of, okay, well, how do we reconcile that? And then the other question that you have to ask yourself is, okay, well, and how far back are you willing to go when you look at this chain? So if you're looking at slavery specifically within the United States, does it stop at the slave owner in the United States? What about the people that transported them? What about the tribes that sold them into slavery in the first place? Are we going all the way back to Africa in order to leverage fines or penalties against those groups as well that provided the initial supply to meet the demand?
And then who pays it back, right?
And then who pays it back? Like, who's responsible?
Do we do some kind of DNA testing to find out who was related to slavers?
Well, and even then, like, does it also apply? What about people that were black that were also slave owners in the United States or participated in the slave trade? Like, what? So that's the problem, is just trying to isolate who are going to be the beneficiaries and who are going to be responsible for paying it. And when you're talking about something this far removed from the actual things that took place, that's very, very difficult to ascertain, because ultimately what you're going to end up with is people that are provided a benefit who did not experience directly or in some cases, they might say indirectly affected, but that's more difficult to prove the longer things go out. And then you're going to punish people, or you're going to force people to pay that also did not engage in any sort of direct illegal act. Not to mention the fact, and this is the part that makes people really uncomfortable, slavery is unjust regardless of whether or not it's legal. But when an activity goes from legal to illegal, right? Typically from legal to illegal. Typically speaking, there's a very, very narrow period of time there where you can seek out reparations for something, because after all, when they were engaging in the act, it was legal. Now, again, notice what I said here. It's unjust whether or not this is an important lesson for people to understand. Laws don't determine what's just and unjust. I think that's objective. Laws are supposed to try to reflect that, and when they fail, we change the laws, or that's what we should do. And then to the extent that reparations or some sort of correction is needed, we attempt to do it as quickly as possible. The problem that we're going to get into now is that you're going to create a whole new set of new victims, essentially, because now they're being punished for something they didn't do in order to provide a benefit for somebody that wasn't directly affected by it. And that's the problem. And again, if you're going to grant reparations in this one instance, okay, how far back do you go? How wide do you go? What all does it include?
And how many more times do you issue it? How many more generations do you issue it?
Well, and this is part of the problem and you saw this with, I think it was, is it Nina Turner? Nina Turner. She came out and she articulated something that really cleared this issue up for me in a way that I think is really relevant. And she said, reparations are not outrageous. It would be a good first step. And I said, a first step. So the first step was not freeing the slaves. The first step was not the Emancipation Proclamation. And the first step was not, the Voting Rights Act or the Civil Rights Act or, none of that. None of that was a first step. The first step now is reparation. And this is one of the problems that I think a lot of people look at this and it doesn't feel genuine, because it always seems like this is a part of grievance politics. This isn't about reconciliation or making people whole, which is what the idea of reparations is. This is becoming a grift.
It's the ultimate culmination of the oppressor-oppressed mindset that you have within woke cultural Marxism, right? Because it's this idea that these people are oppressed, these people are the oppressors. Fast forward 200 years later, it's still the same dynamic, which means these people have to pay money.
Yeah.
But you run into other problems too, like, okay, so what about the Indian immigrant that moved here 5 years ago, whose entire ancestry and family spent, thousands of years in the Indian subcontinent, had nothing to do with this thing that was going on between two other continents, Africa and the Americas, had no connections to it whatsoever, but now lives here and pays taxes to the very government who's supposed to be collecting this money to redistribute it for reparations. There's no way because money's fungible.
Yeah.
There's no possible way that you can say this Indian immigrant will not be helping to pay for. They're paying for the reparations in the form of their taxes if the government engages in this.
Well, can I say another point? Like I offered this once up as a thought exercise. I said, okay, if we're paying, so let's just concede right now that anybody that was held in slavery against their will, regardless of their color, regardless of the time, regardless of the country, that there was an injustice and an evil that was done to them that will always be there, just as if somebody abused somebody or assaulted somebody or something like that, right? And slavery we consider to be kind of like on the top rung of evil things that can happen to another human being, especially the sort of brutal chattel slavery that we see in certain areas of the world. But here's my question. To the extent that we can, quote, make amends, right? Or that reparations can make someone whole or whatever it is, because that's what, again, reparations, repair, right? Here's my question. If we paid it, if we came across some number that we said, okay, yeah, this makes sense, right? And there was some sort of objective mathematical equation that we could do. There was some way that we could identify the people that, were entitled to it and the people that could pay. My question would be this. Does that mean we're done? Does that mean, now I don't mean we're done in the sense that we don't teach about the horrors of slavery and we don't educate people about it, but as far as putting into effect government policies which give special advantages to people based off of their skin color or give subsidies based off of their skin color. Are we done now? Now that we've done the reparations, are we done? Is that all over now? And we can say that to the extent that current generations that had nothing to do with what previous generations did have done everything they possibly can to make up for it. And now we get to start on a playing field where we recognize that, hey, my grandchildren are no longer responsible for the sins of, somebody that lived 100 years ago that looks kind of like me. Is that what we're saying? No, that's never what we're saying, right? It's always, if you granted reparations tomorrow, Nina Turner would be right there talking about the next thing that she wanted and saying that would be the next good first step. Because ultimately this isn't, again, I do not believe this is actually about repairing relationships or making people whole. I think this has become a part of grievance politics, to Christian's point. It's the whole part of the neo-Marxist narrative of oppressor versus oppressed, and the oppressors have to pay constantly, right, in order to make up for the horrible things they've done to the oppressed. And the definitions of who falls within those categories seem to be narrowly tailored to the people that support Democrat policies or leftist policies.
Well, one question to ask, though, also is it because there were other slaves in the U.S. besides people from Africa? There's an estimated something like 300,000 white people were shipped to the Americas as slaves.
Well, okay, so that a lot of that was the whites, indentured servitude,
and
that is different.
Most white. This will be the last point too, because we're at almost 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Nick mentioned this earlier, though. There were slavery is a universal phenomenon.
Yeah.
I mean, slave revolts happened in the Roman Empire, right?
Yeah.
Spartacus was a thing. In the U.S., we have this idea that slavery only affected blacks that were brought over from Africa, and that's simply not true. Slavery, again, is a universal phenomenon that existed in all cultures throughout history. Mm-hmm. There were millions of white Europeans enslaved by the Barbary pirates and sold within the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
There were also, this is conveniently left out in a lot of the narrative that exists around this, there were more slaves from Africa that were brought over to Arabia by Arab slave traders during the exact same time period that the Triangle Trade was taking place.
Yeah.
And before, during the Middle Ages as well, then there were slaves that were imported from Africa to the Caribbean, to Brazil, to the United States, or what became the United States. The Middle Eastern, East African slave trade and the Barbary and Ottoman Empire slave trade that mostly enslaved white Europeans were as large or larger than the slave trade that took place between Africa and the Caribbean. And And that's just that part of the world. That doesn't even talk about slavery that existed in India
Asia,
or slavery that existed within the Mongol Empire. Like, again, it's
well,
a universal phenomenon.
The word slave in English the root word is Slav, right? Slavs were white, right? So I think what we need to do is we need to understand that if there was some genuine way to make this all done, I'd be fine with it. I don't think there is, and I don't think that's what people like Nina Turner and others are trying to do. I think it's a perpetual political issue. And so that's why I don't think it's workable. And unfortunately, I think most of the people that are pushing for it are not really genuine with respect to what they want. And we're out of time on that issue. So, Christian, what's the next one?
All right. We tackled this at the beginning of the podcast from a left perspective, a pretty bad economic policy. Now I'm going to throw one out that's actually quite popular with people on the right, which is tariffs.
Oh, yeah.
And the argument goes something, well, there's many faceted arguments to it. The traditional one is simply, and I mean, this has been around since, Henry Clay, right? The traditional argument is that, well, we need to increase tariffs on imports to the United States in order to protect domestic producers of something. So, for example, in the 80s, it was very popular to campaign on tariffs for cars because Japan was manufacturing plenty of cars and exporting them to the U.S. And they were out-competing American car manufacturers, particularly in Detroit.
Yeah.
And so the idea was we need to increase the taxes on these foreign cars from Asia in order to protect car manufacturers here. It's the same argument that's existed, again, for centuries. This is not anything new.
Yeah.
That's the first argument. There's some other side arguments, though, that I've seen pop up before. One of which is, well, if I was to have the discussion, somebody would say, well, Christian, we need to have tariffs with countries that are hostile to us. Mm-hmm. Because it's not just, against our allies. Japan's actually friendly to us, right? But think about China. China's an adversarial country to the United States. China's also a major manufacturing country. We don't want to be shipping American capital to Chinese manufacturers that are in bed with the CCP. So we have not just an economic incentive, we also have a political incentive. And finally, there's a third angle, which is the currency manipulation. And it's not just currency manipulation, it's also tariffs as well. So the idea is that other countries that don't play fair with us, this is where you get the concept of fair trade, not free trade, right? This is very popular within MAGA circles, for example, but not just within Trump's aspect of the GOP, but the broader populist movement. The idea that, well, we can't engage in free trade with a country that manipulates its own currency in order to give it a competitive advantage or imposes tariffs on other goods unrelated to the ones that we're currently trading with. So, for example, if the U.S. had an edge in, say, semiconductors, we actually don't, the Taiwanese do, but compared to China, we do have an edge in semiconductors. So, hypothetically, if China increased tariffs on semiconductors from the U.S. in order to boost their industry, well, then shouldn't we increase tariffs on a completely different industry to punish the Chinese that's not even related to the semiconductors? So it's like a retaliatory type of thing. And I know that was a bit of a long-winded thing, but I wanted to explain the three different angles.
So my 10 minutes starts after the question is asked, right? Okay, good. That's good to know. That's good. Well, look, the first things first. Again, I believe in American business and I want it to be successful. And the best way for it to be successful is not to try to cheat in the international market, but to be the best at what they do. And you know who's the best at what they do? Good Ranchers. Good Ranchers, absolutely the best at what they do. If you are perusing right now looking for meat, and let's face it, if you're a red-blooded American, that's exactly what you're doing because that's what's for dinner. Then you want to go to a place that when they put raised in America, they mean it. Because when you go to the grocery store right now, and a lot of times you see that sticker, product of the United States, what they actually mean is product of somewhere else in a feedlot that then got brought to the United States, went through minimal processing, and now they slap the American flag on it and pretend that it's something that it really isn't. Good Ranchers does not do that. By the way, if you're also a little bit concerned about what they might be injecting the cattle with these days, such as like mRNA viruses or mRNA vaccines, etc., Good Ranchers doesn't do that, right? And they promise, and when they tell you they're not going to do it, they don't do it. So not only are you getting the best American-raised beef, pork, poultry, and wild-caught seafood, right? They're delivering it directly to your door, and if you use promo code NICK, during the month of March, they're also going to give you a free Easter ham. That's right. As they like to say at Good Ranchers, the tomb may be empty, but that doesn't mean your refrigerator needs to be. So go on to goodranchers.com, promo code NICK, sign up for one of those subscriptions, get the sort of meat that you deserve and that you want, right? And then get yourself a free Easter ham along with that subscription. GoodRanchers.com, promo code Nick. All right, so let's go to answering this question about tariffs. First of all, let's talk about what a tariff is. A tariff is a tax. It is a tax on a foreign-produced product that is coming into the United States. And a lot of people will say, well, yeah, this is good. We need tariffs because we want to protect American industry. Here's my question. If you want to protect American industry, you're going to do it at the expense of something, right? Like if the government's intervening on behalf of one thing, it's doing it, right, against something else. And the idea is that, well, yeah, it's protecting American business against foreign business. I'm like, oh, okay, well, if that's good at a national level, why not for a state level? Let's protect Virginia business against, Maryland business. You know what? No, let's go even further. I want to protect Culpeper business, right, against Rappahannock business. No. I want to protect the business on my own property against everybody else. So I'm going to produce all my own goods and services, and that's going to make my family super wealthy, right? Because we're going to produce everything for ourselves. No, doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. Trade is a good thing. And if trade is good between me and other people in my community, it's also good between me and people in other states. And it's also good between me and people in other countries. So the idea is that when the government comes in and says, oh, we're going to prop up American businesses, it's not at the expense of foreign businesses. I mean, it might be on some level. No, it's at the expense of American consumers.
Because they pay the tax.
Because they pay the tax. So you're hurting Americans either way. We're just choosing which Americans to hurt. And lo and behold, politicians have chosen to hurt the Americans that don't give as much to their political campaigns. Because they can't. Because you as an individual consumer are not going to sit there and lobby the government over a 2-cent sugar tax. But you know who is? The American sugar industry. And they're going to go to Washington, D.C., and they're going to give all kinds of money to the politicians. And they're going to say, look at all the jobs that we create. Look at all the American jobs that will be lost if Americans can buy cheaper sugar abroad. Okay, but what they're not taking into consideration is that if you have more money to spend on the things that make your life good, the things that make your life valuable, well, then you're spending more money on the things that you want, which create jobs in the industries making the things that you want and need. So this isn't the government protecting American businesses from foreign businesses as much as it is hurting American consumers to the benefit of certain select American industries which lobby effectively to get those protections. Now, to your point about this idea about what about countries that engage in like currency manipulation? And what that means is that they are devaluing their own currency so that the American dollar is stronger in their marketplace. And so all of a sudden their goods and services are cheaper for us to buy than American goods and services. Well, if you want to fix that in America, great. Lower taxes and regulations on businesses to make them more competitive. But don't do what you're doing right now, which is raising taxes over there, because here's what's really going on. Here's what China's doing. China is going to its own people and they're saying, hey, guess what? We're going to make your currency less valuable. Why? So we can give Americans a really good deal on our products. Wait, what? Like, does that sound like a good economic policy? Hey guys, we're gonna punish our own taxpayers in order to prop up foreign exchange with a different country. If you want to read some great articles on this, or if you want to read some great stuff on this, Frederick Bastiat writes several things on this, but the petition of the candle makers is one of my favorite when it comes to like just dealing with protectionism in general, but it also applies to tariffs. Okay, so this idea that wealth is about money. No, wealth is about goods and services. And the more goods and services we have coming into the United States, the better off all of us are. There's also something called competitive advantage. So should students going to school in the United States, the wealthiest country in the world, should students be going in order to compete in industries done in Bangladesh? No. We should allow Bangladesh to operate in those industries for which they have a competitive advantage, and the United States should focus on those industries which we have a competitive advantage. And guess what? We have a competitive advantage in high-tech industry. So that's what people should be going into. No, I don't want American students dreaming about one day working for 40 years, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, making textiles. That's not because I'm mean. It's because that's the reality. Once upon a time, the labor market in the United States was much rougher than it is now. What happened? We grew, we expanded, we developed technology, we accepted entrepreneurship, and we benefited as a result. If you're now going to say, well, I want to be totally self-sufficient, well, then you're going to make yourself poorer. just like if you went into your own house and tried to produce all of the goods and services that you use. We want a large, broad international market. Now, there is one exception to this that I will talk about, right? For anybody that's now mad at me that I'm not protecting Americans or American business. You can make an argument that when a country is engaging in tariffs toward you, that you can engage in retaliatory tariffs toward them in order to try to get them to stop. But the objective is always to get to free trade. It's not that you're improving your economy through the tariffs. That's like poisoning yourself and saying, well, I'm poisoning them at the same time and hopefully they'll die faster. Okay, but you're both being poisoned. You're both weaker for this exchange that's taking place, this lack of exchange that's taking place. Right? So the tariff is not a good thing. It's not a wise economic move. You know what the tariff is? Tariffs, on the best case scenario, is chemotherapy. The cancer is people standing in the way of free people being able to trade with one another all over the world. That's the cancer. And if someone decides that they're going to stand in the way and they're going to pass a tariff on the United States, the United States tells them, fine, if you're going to do tariffs on us, we're going to do a retaliatory tariff until you remove yours and then we go back to free trade. You could make an argument that you're basically using the retaliatory tariff as a form of chemotherapy to kill the cancer. The problem is that most politicians think that the chemotherapy is the cure, is the thing that makes you healthy. No, it just kills the thing that's worse faster than it kills you, if that makes sense. So the whole idea is that, look, there can be, you can also have situations where people are engaging in nefarious acts. Like, so obviously China is engaging in targeted acts where they engage in patent infringement, they engage in corporate espionage, they engage in theft. And if you set up tariffs or you set up some sort of trade barriers against them because they're engaging in illegal activity, that's different. I get that. You're basically punishing someone by saying, we're not going to allow you to steal our stuff and then financially benefit from us at the same time. But once again, you have to remember, when you do that, you're doing that to get them to stop doing the bad things, not because doing that thing makes you richer. It doesn't make you richer. That's the important thing to understand.
The last thing that I want to bring up on this point, and it might send it over 10 minutes, but that'll be totally my fault, is what do you say to the people and especially the voters in the Rust Belt, which is arguably the biggest swing area in the country, right? Michigan, Wisconsin, politically Pennsylvania, although people say it's not, Midwest. It definitely politically is part of the Rust Belt. Ohio as well. That, their livelihoods and jobs have been utterly decimated by globalization, which we can argue is it has overall net positive for the U.S., but in certain parts of the country, the manufacturing base got destroyed when those jobs ended up being shipped out to China and Japan in the 70s and 80s.
Well, on top of that, too, when Trump issued the steel tariffs, all of a sudden, steel got really scarce and the prices shot way, way up. And there were people that couldn't get certain things built because of those steel tariffs, because we were no longer making the steel at a cheaper price here or whatever it was, and things had already been shipped off. And now we're putting a tariff on something that we desperately need.
The problem is always going to be this. If your solution for helping an American that has been, let's say, has lost their job as a result of international trade in a more competitive market overseas, if your only solution for helping them is to hurt another American, that's not a good solution. See, this is advertised as, no, we're not hurting them. We're helping the American at the expense of that, mean, evil foreign company. No, you're not. You're helping that American at the expense of that one. That's what you're actually doing. Because what should be happening is we should be saying, okay, Americans, if they have a competitive advantage of that, why do they have that competitive advantage? Well, if it's because they can do it cheaper, we should ask ourselves, why can they do it cheaper? Well, is it because of all the taxes and regulations and restrictions that we have on the products over here? Well, that should be the first thing that we do then. We should say, okay, look, we're not going to put our people at a competitive disadvantage through excess taxes and regulations, so we're going to remove that so they can actually continue to produce. Or if it's something where that company just does a whole lot better than the company in the United States, well, then that United States company has to adapt its operations, because it is not the duty of the American taxpayer to prop up American companies that are not doing a good job. That is not what entrepreneurship is about. That's not what free markets are about. And you know what? That's not what patriotism is about.
But oftentimes it's not just that they're not doing a good job. Oftentimes it's that there's onerous government regulations and restrictions and things like that, and environmental policy that has ratcheted everything down to make it a worse product.
I have seen so many people who will, at one side of their mouth, talk about how we got to subsidize an American business or whatnot, and then they'll show up on the other side and want to tax and regulate them out of existence. and you're sitting here going, this is the worst of both worlds, because not only are you making it so much more difficult for them to produce goods and services, hire people, expand, and be prosperous. But then on the other side, after you've created the conditions that make it impossible for them to compete, you come along the other side and you steal from taxpayers in order to prop them up. And then the third thing that you do that doesn't get recognized here is that you train the business not to be responsive to customers, because the customers aren't the one keeping them alive. The politicians are. And so now their main focus of their effort to stay in existence as a business is not better customer service. It's not more efficient use of resources. It's buying off as many politicians as possible in order to keep the subsidies coming.
Okay, so next question.
Yeah.
This is one that we hear buzzing around constantly, and there's a lot of divide. A lot of Republicans love this idea. I mean, I think Ivanka Trump is one of the ones that really have been pushing this, and that is paid family leave. They want when a woman, we're assuming women are the ones having babies, okay?
that
Controversial statement
that is
nowadays.
the assumption we make on this
Typically
channel.
what happens is a lot of organizations and companies will offer paid leave, maternity leave. Well, what they want is family leave. They want paternity leave as well. And so they want both of them to be able to stay home with the baby, and it all sounds wonderful. And it's great that this baby's going to get all of this love and care from both parents. And now the father can help the mother during this very difficult time, and they don't have to go back to work within a certain amount of time. Tell me what could be so bad about that, babe?
And that is how it sounds. It's like, oh, so you think that a woman should lose her job just for having a baby? Or you think, no, I don't think that. Here's my question. Is it a company's responsibility to provide you, to be forced to provide you a benefit that has nothing to do necessarily with the job that you provide for that company? I think the answer is no. Now, do I think it would be a good idea? Like if you're a company and you have a woman that is working for you that is just phenomenal at her job, and you desperately want her to be happy at this company because you do not want her going to your competition, and you say, hey, look, take 8 weeks off or whatever it is, right? Take it off. We're going to continue to pay you the whatnot. Maybe you can work from home a little bit when you get a chance, the whole deal. But you are so valuable to this company that we want to provide this as a benefit to you. Would that be a good idea for that company? Yes. Yes, it would be. Why would it be a good idea for that company? Is it because it's that company's responsibility to essentially help manage the home life of their employees? No. It's because it makes sense for the profitability of the company, right? Companies are not people. They're not institutions that owe their employees anything more than what their employees owe the company. You would never dream of an employer or a business owner getting together and saying, hey, I need to do X, Y, and Z. So all of you as my employees, you're now forced to do something, forced to do, it has nothing to do with your job. You're now forced to do something in order to benefit me, right? Whenever that does happen, whenever we always call that an employer exploiting their workers. Okay, well, there is such a thing as employee exploitation of the employer. It just usually happens through government policy. And again, well, I've got to flesh this out because it kind of all goes together. Otherwise, people just think you're a jerk. Again, I think it is a wonderful thing for companies to say, look, we value families here. We want to feel like a family. We want you to stay here long term with this company. I think that's a great thing. It is wrong for a government to come in and say you must do this as a condition of employment because, lo and behold, here come the unintended consequences. Let's say I have two people. that I want to employ. One's a man, one's a young woman. Let's say one's in her mid-20s and she just got married. The other is a man in his mid-20s and he just got married. And let's say the female actually has slightly better credentials than the male. Not a ton better, but slightly better. But I know the probability of her maybe getting, maternity leave is coming up pretty quick, and I can't afford to lose someone with what's going on in the company right now. Maybe I'm a smaller company and I just can't afford to lose someone for 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever it's going to be. I can't do it. Who do I hire? Well, I hire the male employee because I don't got to give them that leave. Now the government solutions will give them all that leave. Okay, well, you haven't addressed the underlying situation for the man, have you? The underlying situation or not for the man, but for the employer. The underlying situation for the employer is they can't afford to do it. or they can't afford to do it and give you the same hours, or they can't afford to do it and give you the promotion, or they can't afford to do it and give you the same pay. Every single time the government comes in and interacts on your behalf and says, we're going to force your employer to do this, what they're really saying is we're going to force you to forfeit some other benefit that you may have preferred. You may have preferred more pay over maternity leave. You may have preferred more vacations over that. You may have preferred something else. You don't get to make that decision anymore. The government has now made it for you. And we're going to force the business to subsidize that.
Well, that's not to mention the fact that so you want paid leave. So they're paying you while you're doing no work.
Yeah.
Well, the work is still over here needing to be done.
Yeah.
So they have to plug somebody else in to do that work. So now this person's a temp and they know you're coming back and you've got preference. And so they're scrambling to try to figure out how do they, what do they do next? And not only that, they've got to pay the temporary person more because it's temporary and it's not a permanent position. And then there's always this promise of, well, this person may decide to stay home permanently, and then it would be permanent position. But now they're paying this person a higher wage because they're in this, difficult situation, and they've got to maintain that higher wage now when you decided you're just going to stay home forever. Well, and so they're having to pay two people to do one person worth of work because you're on leave.
Well, not everything that is, it might be a nice idea or a generous idea, therefore should be mandated by law, right? Because you never know. Now, a big company, and here's the other thing that people don't understand, is sometimes the bigger companies, they can afford that hit.
Yeah.
They can afford that hit.
They'll vote for something like this.
And so they'll not vote. They'll lobby for the law because what will happen is that their smaller competitors who can't afford that hit
it chases them right out of business.
Run out of business.
Yeah.
So now that young woman or that young man that was working for that startup that was really excited that maybe had ownership in that business, they had a cut of the profit sharing or something like that. They've gone out of business because the big guy that could afford the new government mandate, they could eat it up in their overall profits, but the smaller one couldn't. Well, is she better off now as a result?
No.
I would argue she isn't. But this is what happens when you look at a good idea within an isolated situation and you say, I'm going to take something that might have been a generous thing that an employer could offer, right, on a case-by-case basis, and now I'm going to make it mandatory. That affects every single employee in that business, even the ones that will never take advantage of maternal or family medical leave, right? And people even say, so even if they're sick, you think it? No, here's what I think. I think in the real world, the one we actually occupy, not the one that exists in the minds of politicians. I think in the real world that we occupy, employers and business owners and everyone else have to make hard decisions with respect to what they can afford to do and what they can't afford to do. I think companies that do a good job taking care of their employees, who also take care of their employers by actually doing good work, I think that's the ideal situation. I think you're more likely to achieve that in a free market than when you have politicians trying to manipulate the process or put their fingers on the scale in one direction or another without having any idea of how that company actually runs or what needs to run. And the end result is that you have employees that get very, very frustrated when their pay doesn't go up or when they can't get a bonus or when something else can't happen. And they never associate it to the list of government mandated, employee subsidized issues, because ultimately it's not subsidized by your employer. It's subsidized by you, because the employer had a certain amount of money available for labor. They had a certain amount of money available for it. And when the government chips away at it, that means there's less available for your pay. Now, I'm not claiming that every employer is a great guy. I'm not claiming that every employer is a great gal. I'm not claiming that they all treat their employees. I'm not claiming any of that. But the question is where do you have more of a chance to get an outcome like that? I think it's one where employees are empowered to take their labor to the person that will pay them most for it, and where employers get to hire the people that would do the best job for them. And then those two people get to negotiate what the best arrangement is for their cost for labor and everything else. But I think politicians more often than not end up becoming pawns of bigger companies that are then using the law to manipulate the marketplace in their advantage against their smaller up-and-coming competitors.
All right. I think we've done a lot of economic-related things lately, and these are like very controversial topics. Yeah. But I want to dive a little bit into domestic policy. And unlike previously, this won't be a 10-minute long introduction. We'll go with gun control. There's no explanation really needed.
Yeah.
The one thing that I will say is that Biden has, in some ways, kind of made gun control not the centerpiece of his campaign, but he's campaigning on it. He's talked about how we need to bring back like the assault weapons ban that was passed in the 90s that expired in 2004. He said that that's a good idea. He wants to bring it back. He's a huge proponent of things like red flag laws, which we know is a big issue at the state level as well, because that happened in Virginia a few years ago, and we're not alone. So, I mean, you've heard all these arguments yourself as a politician in Richmond, right? Yep. Run through some of the most common arguments in favor of gun control and why they might sound good on paper, but they're actually a really terrible policy in practice.
I think 538, which is more of a left of center think tank, they do a lot of work in politics and other like policy analysis and things of that. There was a couple of people that wrote an article there, and they wrote it from the perspective of, look, we came into this being pro-gun control, and we looked at policies in the UK, Canada, Australia, and here's what we found out. It doesn't really work. And if you look at the gun control policies in the UK and Australia, they vastly exceed the proposals that we usually see in the United States. Like an assault weapons ban will have almost no impact on gun violence, almost none when you look at actually the source of gun violence in the United States. That is why countries that always start off with something like, oh, we're going to do an assault weapons ban, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that, always end up with confiscation. And they end up confiscating more and more and more until you get to the point where you can only own like antiques or shotguns, or maybe you can have a pistol if you go through a very, very elaborate process where you have to prove that you actually need it. It's not assumed that you as a free person would have access to something like that. And the end result is that ultimately they might point to their gun violence statistics, but their violence statistics don't tend to improve. And that's the number one issue that we have to look. Are you trying to stop violence, or are you just trying to stop a particular implement being used in a violent activity? The other thing that you have to take into consideration is not just the illegal violence or the immoral violence that you stop. You also have to consider the moral violence that you stop. Now, what do I mean by that? All right, so here's one of the dirty tricks about gun violence statistics. Let's say you are a woman that is trying to get away from her incredibly abusive boyfriend. You're trying to get away, and every time you leave, he comes over, he beats you up, you call the cops, take out a restraining order, whatever happens, right? But he keeps doing it. And then finally one day you're like, I'm not getting beat one more time. So you go out, you buy a firearm in order to defend yourself. He comes over to beat you, you kill him, right? Or you just shoot him. Or you just show the gun and he leaves. Okay, that's gun violence, right? Because you were either brandishing, you shot him, or you killed him with a firearm. That goes into the category of gun violence statistic. Now, let's say you're not allowed to get the gun, and he comes over this time and he beats you to death. That doesn't show up in a gun. Your gun violence statistic scores just improved by keeping the guns out of the hand of the victim of domestic violence. Is that what you wanted? Because that's what you did. Now, if you look at the statistics with the United States, the conservative statistics, not the ones that come from more of the pro-gun groups, say anywhere from like 2 to 2.5 million a year, where a law-abiding citizen used a firearm to protect themselves and to prevent themselves from becoming a victim of a crime, right? The conservative estimates are about 500,000 times a year. So if you've got roughly about 30 to 35,000 gun deaths a year, right? Remember, over half of those are suicides. That's tragic. But if you remove the gun, do you remove the suicide? Probably not. They probably just find something else, right? A lot of the other gun violence has to do with things like gang activity, like disproportionately gang activity. In fact, if you took like the 10 top urban areas within the United States and you took those out of our statistics, what you'd find is that our overall gun violence rates drop off significantly around the rest of the world, because a lot of it has to do with inner city crime and inner city gang activity. Are they using AR-15s? No, more than likely they're using pistols, which is why gun control will always go further and further. So here's the argument. Your hope when you pass gun control is that you're going to prevent bad people from getting guns to hurt good people, right? That's a noble goal. All of us share that goal. But the only thing you guarantee is that it will be harder for people to obey the law to get guns. That's what you guarantee. You hope it will do this, but you're guaranteeing it will do this. So the guarantee is going to affect, let's use the conservative estimate of 500,000 times a year. If you're really going for the sort of gun control that they did like in the UK and Australia, your guarantee is that those 500,000 use cases are now greatly diminished of people using a firearm to protect themselves. Maybe just by showing that they have it. maybe not even by using it. Okay. How much does it affect over here on the 30 to 35,000? Well, with the gang activity, have you really, they're still going to go get guns. They might just get them illegally, or they might use something else. What about the people that commit suicide? Do they no longer have suicidal thoughts the moment you take the gun out of their hand? Or do they find something else? So you hope your policy will do this. It's guaranteed to affect hundreds of millions of law-abiding citizens within the United States, guaranteed to affect them, guaranteed to negatively impact the people that will now obey the law and not get that firearm in order to protect themselves, in order to hope to do this. Here's the crazy part. That's your best case scenario. Then it makes it a little bit harder for bad guys to get guns, while definitely making it harder for everybody else. That's your best case scenario. What's your worst case scenario? Well, over time, you get somebody in power that looks around and decides that they don't really like this representative government thing, or they've just decided that they're going to use and manipulate representative government in order to achieve their end states. And if that means punishing you because they don't like the way you look, right? And anybody that wants to tell me that didn't happen, I love it how the same people telling me that's not going to happen are the same people telling me that the United States government is systemically racist. The same people telling me that the government can't be trusted to do anything because they're all racist and bigots and it's built on an edifice of white supremacy are also telling me that those are the only people that should have access to firearms because, golly, they'll never use them for inappropriate purposes. They'll never use them to hurt their own population, to control their own population, to punish their own population. So if you want to sit here and pretend that we are just so enlightened nowadays, that there's no country in the West that would abuse its power at the expense of the civil liberties or property rights of their citizens, right, then I'm going to tell you, you need to pick up a history book because it just wasn't that long ago, right? It wasn't that long ago. And in some places, it's currently happening. So ultimately, I would say this. One of the reasons why I think it is essential that in a free society, people be permitted to own firearms is not because some people won't abuse that right and do something wrong with it. But you're no longer living in a free society when your rights are all of a sudden forfeit when somebody else abuses theirs. That's not a free society. And if your ability to provide for your own safety, if your ability to provide for the safety of your family, if your ability to provide for the security of your own country, if all of that is wiped out the moment somebody else abuses their right, then it was never a right in the first place. It was a government privilege that could be taken away. And don't be surprised, because last time I checked, picking up a history book, you know who has a really bad track record of inappropriately using firearms to harm, murder, kill, oppress people? Governments. So please, please don't tell me that free law-abiding people can't be trusted with firearms, but the government can. They're not made from finer clay.
It was, I believe it was Mal who said, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun.
Yeah.
The last thing that I want to bring up, and I know this is going to send us over, but it has to be brought up.
That's his answer on every single one. I'm going to do that on mine.
Hamilton brought it up when we were planning this podcast, and he explicitly wanted this question asked, and I think that a lot of our audience members would appreciate it, which is...
We'll ask it and we'll see.
The issue... the issue of...
Good lead up.
Yeah, I know. The issue of concealed carry permits.
Yeah.
I know many Republicans, many Republican lawmakers, and we know many Republican-leaning states that for some reason they don't seem to want to pass constitutional carry. The argument goes something like this. Well, you're nuts if you don't think that, we should require people to get a permit. Hamilton, you've worked for GOA, so explain the issue here.
Quick story. I was in chemistry class in high school, and I was sitting beside a guy whose family owned a gun store. And I guess I was in 11th grade or 10th grade maybe. And he said, people shouldn't have to get concealed carry permits to carry a gun. And I said, you're crazy. How in the world could we keep people who shouldn't have guns from having guns? And he kept making the argument, I just thought it was kind of ridiculous at the time. And then I go to college, and I get connected with my roommate who was the leader of the gun rights organization on campus, and then ended up working for Gun Owners of America, and I got involved with that pretty heavily. And he kept harping on this point. I'm like, dude, no, we've got to have concealed carry permits. Got to have concealed carry permits. Finally, I came around and came to the conclusion that if one must request a concealed carry permit from the government, it is not a right, but it is a privilege that the government can keep or take away. And I finally came to that conclusion. So
Well, I'll say this too. It's so you have a constant at the federal level because of the Second Amendment, but also because now remember the Second Amendment used to only be a restriction on the federal power. It wasn't until the incorporation doctrine that all of a sudden the Bill of Rights was binding on state law as well, right? And that was considered more of a progressive decision. So I kind of think it's interesting. The same people that are like, well, the Second Amendment couldn't have meant this. It's like, well, at one point it didn't. You guys decided it now applies. So now in Virginia, a lot of state constitutions have their own. Like in Virginia, we have Article 1, Section 13, which also talks about the right to keep and bear arms. So if you have a right to both keep and bear arms, the question is under what conditions and everything else. The problem that I have with the whole concealed carry permit is that it seems absurd to me. People are like, if you have a right to bear arms, so like in Virginia, you can open carry. So I explained this once. I said, I just think you should be able to carry concealed in an inconspicuous manner.
It's a matter of carrying discreetly.
Yeah, discreetly.
The main people who want to carry discreetly are actually women.
Yeah.
We want to be able to have it in our purse or have a bra holster or a thigh holster, something. We want to have a holster that can't be detected by other people because,
and you don't want to wear it on your
private.
hip.
Yeah.
And so it's a little ridiculous that she can walk into the grocery store with a gun on her hip, but if she puts her jacket over it, now she's a criminal.
Right.
That's ridiculous. Like, well, you've got to go through a special we don't make people take tests to exercise constitutionally protected liberties. Again, there used to be a poll test, and you know how that was used? It was used by Jim Crow people in order to prevent black people from being able to vote. Now, you may say all day long, well, that sounds reasonable. Should you have to take a test to prove that you actually know how the government works before you vote for it? Until you have to ask the all-important question of who gets to decide what's on the test.
Right.
Right, until you get to ask the all-important question. Like it used to be in Jim Crow states that, they might have had concealed carry permits, but they weren't shall carry.
Right.
And shall carry means, or shall issue, which means as long as you meet the criteria, you get one. You don't got to prove you need one. Because at the same time that, Jim Crow states were handing out concealed carries like frigging, candy to Klan members, they denied Martin Luther King Jr. one. Right? They denied, we don't see you have a need for this one. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Guy was getting death threat after death threat after death threat. And again, the same politicians will come to me and say, oh, well, the government would never use it for that purpose. Are you serious?
Well, in California, it's really hard to get a concealed carry permit in California because you have to prove that your life is under threat pretty much, or that you're in some kind of a position that is a high danger element to it.
By the time you've proved it, it might be too late.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I think we got time for two more.
Ooh.
Well, I just finished the gun control question, so Tina, it's
Okay.
up to you now.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and piggyback on my last question about family leave.
Yeah.
And how sometimes people decide to stay home with their children and raise their children, just tighten up the belt. Maybe they even have to move somewhere, a little tighter, a little smaller or whatever, and to deal with it and raise their own kids. But then there's the other people that decide to go back after their paid family leave.
Yeah.
And now someone's got to pay for daycare, and it sure as heck ain't going to be them. Yeah. And so they want to know, how come the government can't give me subsidies for daycare, or why can't daycare be subsidized?
And the reason they're asking the question is because daycare has gotten so expensive, and so they're looking for a solution.
Because right now you've got situations where people are paying. There was a recent situation where someone was talking about paying $70,000 a year. 80,000 a year for their child care so that they could go to work. So, and what I'm wondering is, why don't you just pay yourself that money? But anyway, go ahead.
Let's do the best case. Yeah. Let's do the best case scenario on this. Let's what we call Iron Man, not straw man something. Right. So the Iron Man argument is, you have a couple. They're married. They have a child, but they need both incomes to survive. They need both of them. And so she's got to go back to work, but you got to pay for daycare. Daycare's gotten expensive. And so the argument goes, well, why can't the government subsidize a portion of that daycare so it's a little bit easier on this family trying to make ends meet? The problem is this. Now, on the moral level, we might have sympathy for that. We might even say that, hey, if my family was in a situation, if our daughter's going to get married in June, if they were in a situation where they needed both income, then our response would be like, okay, well, your grandparents live close by. We'll help. right? And that would be, maybe an appropriate response to that. But they say, okay, well, what if there aren't no grandparents close by? Or what if there aren't this? Or what if there aren't that? Okay, the question is this. Is it right for the government to take money from somebody else in order to subsidize somebody else's daycare? Now, again, I don't believe that's what we would call a legitimate function of government, which is to say that government is the only one that can do this or is the best suited to do this, right? You're not going to find anywhere in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution or in other places in state constitutions where it's like, oh, yeah, this is a government function to provide daycare. I think that would be kind of problematic if it was. But even in that situation, the underlying question that we have to ask is, okay, why is a young married couple with a child in a situation where both of them have to work and the daycare is so expensive they can't afford it? Well, if it's inflation, then what you're saying is, oh, well, the government caused the problem and now the government is going to solve the problem by spending more money. Okay, but if the government's engaging in inflationary monetary policy, it means they're printing money because they've already taxed and borrowed more than they can. And so how are they going to pay for this additional expenditure? Oh, more inflationary monetary policy.
Yeah, but most people don't recognize that it's the government. They think that it's greedy businesses. So
I get that, but let me. That's what I'm trying to explain now. I'm trying to explain how it isn't that right now. You may have a business that greedy. Okay, look. Here's the bottom line: if a business could get wealthy just by quote being greedy, all right, then none of them would work. None of them would hire employees. The CEOs would just sit on their couch and think greedy thoughts and watch the money roll in. You can't do that, right? They still got to go out there and they got to produce and they got to provide products and services. So if you do have somebody that's acting in a greedy manner, the solution to that is competition. Okay, but when you look at daycare, so first of all, step one, the government most likely created the conditions, which has created the situation where now the two incomes are needed for this family. If you're going to say they're going to solve it with more spending, my point is the government spending is what got them in the problem in the first place. You're not going to alleviate the overall problem with more government spending. You're just, again, choose which Americans you want to hurt and choose how you want to hurt them and to what degree you want to hurt them. Now, some people say, well, good, I want to hurt the rich ones. It's like, I got bad news. You're going to hurt all of them. You're going to hurt different ones. I got bad news. You're going to hurt everyone that works for that rich guy that you just hurt. Sorry. That's the reality. Do we want to work in real land or do we want to work in fake political land?
So tell us what happens if there is subsidized childcare or daycare.
A couple things happen. One, taxpayers are now fitting the bill. You are now fitting the bill for a good or service you're not receiving, which is not ideal, right? Not ideal. We'll say that, not ideal. Two, you're going to have daycares lobbying the government for government subsidies because they're going to be able to pocket that. Three, you're also disincentivizing the process of people actually making their own decisions based off of works best for them, based off of what they produce, as opposed to what other people produce, right? It's easy to make decisions when somebody else is responsible for fitting the bill, but you're supposed to make decisions based off of what you can afford to do, right? And so it may be that someone says, you know what? Gosh, if daycare for our two kids is going to cost $80,000 a year for me to work, and in order for me to work, I also need another car, and I'm going to eat out more, and I'm going to need a different wardrobe for work. And when I add all of that up, it comes out to, gosh, just for me to have an extra job costs $100,000, and I'm only making $65,000. Then why are you taking that job? Like you could literally quit your job, stay home with your kids, and be making more on the whole than what you are right now for all your different expenses associated with having that additional job. And so sometimes people don't even bother to ask that question if it's never been posed to them because somebody else is fitting the bill. Now, again, that's not everybody, but for anybody that's going to tell me nobody does it that way. I sat in the General Assembly as a young woman who works for a political activist think tank, got up and said, well, my grandparents helped me, but I got to pay $80,000 for childcare for my two kids, right? And I shouldn't have to pay that. Well, here's a question. Who should? So should people that didn't have your kids pay for it? Because that's basically what they're saying. I made this decision, right? This decision is financially burdensome. Somebody else should have to take care of that financial burden. I'm sorry, you can ask for that help. You do not get to demand that help. I don't think that's appropriate.
Okay. Go
All
ahead.
right, so, but again, the other side of this, though, is about understanding the origin of some of these problems. I am not sitting here arrogantly telling people that are desperately trying to make ends meet that you just need to suck it up, buttercup. Like, I'm not saying that. I am saying it is inappropriate to assume that somebody else should be responsible for your decisions. That is not fair. Let's make that very clear. This is not fair. The other thing is that you should probably be very, very careful going to the same institution which caused your problems in the first place as the ones that are going to solve it. Because the only way they're going to solve this problem they've created for you is by creating problems for other people. And then those people are going to show up and demand a government solution.
I'd like to point out one more reason why this is actually a negative thing on the whole, and that is daycare used to be the last resort. It was really for people that something catastrophic had happened and they really needed the daycare because they didn't have family that could help. They didn't have an individual that was willing to come in and help be a caretaker. They couldn't pay a nanny, whatever it might have been. And in fact, they're trying to stop the nanny situation from happening now, even though it's a healthier option than daycare.
Yeah.
So now daycare has become the default, whereas it used to be a last resort. And now you have people don't want to shine a light on what daycare does to children and the fact that it's actually very damaging as at the age that they're going through. They really do need their parent or some kind of one-on-one caretaker. So this institutionalized setting is really bad for the development of these young children. And now it's sort of become the default now for people that feel like they have to go back to work. And on top of that, now, if you add a government subsidy to it, it will become the default even for people that actually do have family that could help them, or they do have some other method that could work. But now this is such a cheap option now that now this is going to be the default for them as well. And then we swoop in and we grab a whole other swath of children who now will have detachment disorders and things like that, just like the rest of the kids that are in this institutional setting. And so I'm not saying that, obviously it's hard to find a perfect solution. And I'm not saying you're a bad person if you have utilized daycare, because sometimes you have no choice. But it's not ideal, and we need to stop acting like it's ideal. And any kind of government perverse incentive that we add to that, now it's not even the fact that it damages you economically, and it's not even the fact that this isn't supposed to be what government does. Now we're talking about damaging children, and that's a perverse, a bad thing.
I think you're absolutely right on that. I think it's also about time that we start asking a very important question, and why is it that there seems to be a political movement in this country that thinks the ideal setting is to separate children from their parents as much as possible and as early as possible in order to get them in the hands of experts? And I'm sorry, nobody gets to tell me that isn't happening. I've seen it. I serve on the education committee, and it's always put forward as this idea of, well, this is about parents that are in need, or they need to be dual income, or they need additional education, or they need this. And it's always get them out of the hands of the parents and in over here. Now, I'm not saying everybody has a nefarious intent behind this, but I also don't believe that nobody has a grander strategy involved in doing this, because I've seen the way my colleagues sometimes act toward parents. And it's this idea that we have to get the kids into these public schools because it's going to be the government-run schools that teach them.
Because the parents are dangerous.
And not just teach them how to read or teach them how to do math, because quite frankly, they're not even doing the best job on a lot of that. But it's teach them what to believe, how to behave, how to interact. Right, that's what it is, social emotional learning. It's all this other stuff that has nothing to do with academics, but is everything about creating this sort of citizen that leftist progressives think should exist. And they definitely don't think the parents in many of these cases will do it. And they're right. I'm not raising my kids the way they want them raised. Right. And so they feel like this is an obligation. This is a good thing. Let's get the kids out of the hands of the parents, who we don't know what they'll do or how they'll behave or what their training is, but we know the training of all these other people, and we'll get them over here. And I'm sorry, that is a very real thing. And again, on moral reasons, on practical reasons, on child development reasons, on detachment issues reasons. I'm not saying that daycare is never necessary or that you're a bad person if you utilize daycare. I'm not saying that. I am saying, though, I am tired of people saying that because they're in a bad situation and they have to utilize something, that therefore that something is just as good as everything else. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Children do much better when they have those younger formative years with their mother, with their father. Now, the argument will be back, well, that's why you got to pay for paid maternity leave. No, that's why we need stronger multi-generational families.
Yes.
That's why you don't do everything in your power to screw over your relationships with your friends and family that you're going to need to help you, and that you're going to then in turn help them later on in life when they need it as well. There's a reason why this happened. And it wasn't because we just didn't have enough government programs. It was because there's actually something to it. So, and I feel sorry for people that are in situations where they don't have that sort of family structure, but can we at least admit that the family structure would be ideal, and maybe we should stop doing things that dismantle or destruct or disturb that family structure, and we should be more to promote it, not through government subsidization and regulation, but oftentimes from government, stop trying to be the daddy to everybody.
Right.
All right, last one.
Nick, the last question that I'm going to pose to you is actually one that's not on our list.
Oh, no.
All right.
And
I'm scared.
And it's about entitlement spending.
Yeah.
And, you know, our good pal Ben Shapiro, who, you know, somebody in our comments was actually thought that I was like upset at Ben Shapiro or mad at him when we did the episode where I brought up owning the libs is not enough because, you know, conservatives are making rational arguments in an irrational world. I just want to clarify. I agree with Ben Shapiro on a lot of stuff, and I like a lot of what he has to say, but he got a lot of flack recently when he came out and he said that we should not have the retirement age set at 65 because when Social Security was created, the life expectancy was 64.
Yeah.
And the life expectancy is no longer 64. It's now like in the 80s. And so we're creating a situation where entitlement spending, particularly things like Social Security, but also other entitlement or welfare programs like Medicare, Medicaid, have consumed such a large portion of the budget that they're fiscally unsustainable. Now, when he came out with that, I was actually surprised how many people on the right attacked him for this.
Yeah.
And
this is everyone's favorite subsidy.
This is an issue where a lot of people say, you know, basically, how could you be so cruel and heartless to want to raise the retirement age? Or, you know, Democrats love to do it, but increasingly Republicans also love to say, like, you know, I'm not going to cut anything from X.
Yeah.
And the lone voices out there, like Ben Shapiro, that are trying to make the sane fiscal argument are getting beat up by our own side, not to say nothing of the people on the left. So
yeah.
What's your take on this?
65 is so much younger than it used to be. Can I just, I need to just say this one thing real quick. I was talking to my mom, okay? And my mom, she is 65, all right? She will take a sledgehammer and be knocking down walls still at 65. She's out there cutting tile.
I mean, yeah, it's at the old folks' home, and they ask her to stop. But I mean,
no, she's out there cutting tile. She's working like 10 men. This woman is still such a hard worker, and she's tired, and her body hurts. Yeah. But she has so much more energy than your average 30-year-old. It is insane. And so I'm looking at my mom, going, yeah, Can
I tell you why it's not the point?
Hold on. So I'm looking at this going, 65 is not what the age it used to be. 65 is not that old. And then on top of that, I couldn't believe it. My mom was talking about, climbing some ladder and working on some things. And it had occurred to me that I had recently read that the word elderly applies to anyone 65 and over. So my mom is considered elderly, which just blows my mind because my mom does not look, act, or think in an elderly, what I would imagine elderly way would be. She's nothing like Joe Biden.
Wow.
Nothing like Joe Biden. And so I was telling my mom, I said, you got to think about what these news, what the news headline would be if you fell off that ladder, elderly woman falls off ladder, that's how it's going to look, Mom. You need to stop doing this stuff. And because I had just read an article where elderly woman trips over her dog on a walk. And I'm like, oh no, some 80-year-old woman tripped on her dog. No, she was 65.
Yeah.
65. So You guys, 65.
Okay,
How
here-
many people do you know that 65 is old? No, it's not. It's not old.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
All right.
Rant over.
It kind of depends, right? It kind of depends. And it doesn't matter because when you were forced by the federal government to participate in this program, you were told 65 is when you collect
Yeah.
benefits.
Well, now it's
And so-
67, but gotcha.
And so the point is when the government is the one controlling the benefit, the government can change the terms of the benefit. If you actually had a private retirement plan, right, and they just arbitrarily said, hey, I know we were going to cash out at this, but now we're not. You know who you'd go to? You'd go to court and you'd sue them and you'd win,
Right.
right? But when the government does it, it's like, oh, well, we're the government. We write the laws. Here's the thing I want to ask. So when we talk about entitlement spending, there's a difference between entitlement and welfare. Entitlement is I pay into something in exchange for a benefit. Welfare is I don't pay in or I don't pay in to the extent of what I receive. And the reason why they call some of these things entitlement programs is because, when you're paying into Social Security or Medicaid or Medicare or whatnot, you're supposed to be entitled to a benefit. Here's what I want people to understand, especially about Social Security, because I get in trouble for this and I don't care. I don't care because it isn't wrong, right? When people can stop saying I'm mean and start telling me where I'm incorrect, I'll start caring. But they don't. They try to shut me up or they try to call us mean or they use ad hominem attack, but they never say I'm lying. They never say I'm wrong. Who in their right mind thought the federal government would be good at managing retirement? Is it because they've done such a good job with their own budgets? That's right. I was looking at how the federal government managed money and I thought, gosh, if only they could manage my retirement. I want to be $38 trillion in debt. Right? No, but that's what we did. Why? Because it bought votes. And when did we do it? We did it under FDR. Why? Because FDR admired all of the mandatory retirement systems that he saw in countries which are largely fascist. I'm not lying. I'm not wrong. He loved watching these retirement. He thought these mandatory retirement programs made a whole lot of sense. We were going to take care of people in their old age. And it wasn't welfare. It was an entitlement program because everybody was going to pay into it. See, originally, a lot of the people and the Democrats came and said, no, we're just going to make the wealthy pay into it. Because no, I don't want it to be welfare. I want it to be something everybody pays into. Everyone's going to benefit because then everyone will fight to keep it.
And they
was
did.
Absolutely right. And now you are stuck with a horribly run retirement program that will not even come close to producing what would have been produced if you would have taken the same amount of money that you have to give to the federal government with every paycheck, and if you would have put it into the New York Stock Exchange average, not an individual stock, you could have just taken the total of the New York Stock Exchange, right? That seems pretty safe, right? If you would have put the same amount of money in that for your entire working years, and then you would have retired, not only would you have had significantly more money, it would have been yours, because right now you don't. What you have is a monthly benefit, right, that goes away when you die. So maybe you paid into Social Security all your life, but you only live for 5 years after the fact. Oh, do you get all that money back like you would in a private retirement program or something like that, or some sort of insurance? No, you don't get it back.
No, and you can't leave it to your kids.
No, you don't
can't
get to
do any of
leave it
that.
to your kids. You don't get to do any of that. Why? Because it's not really yours. Why? Because it's not an actual retirement fund. It operates far more closely to a Ponzi scheme. If a private institution was operating a retirement fund the way the federal government is operating Social Security, they would be arrested. Why? Because the way Social Security works is you don't put money that then goes into account that accrues interest over time for which you then collect a benefit at the end. You don't do that. You put money in to pay for people that are currently receiving that benefit. And then when you're old enough to retire, hopefully there'll be enough people in the labor market putting in to where you can collect your benefit. But don't worry, the government promises you'll get it. Why? Because they have the ability to tax. They can forcefully confiscate money in order to give it to you. That's the whole source of this retirement. It is not based off of some sort of profitable investment. It's not based off of the fact that it's returning interest off of multiple profitable investments. It's based entirely on the federal government's ability to use force and coercion to take money from people who have earned it to give it to you. That's it.
Well,
There you go.
most people would
there's
ask,
the scheme.
I paid into it my whole life, so where did that money go? Because when this first started,
Yeah.
it wasn't like this.
No, it was. That was the problem. That was the problem. The moment they issued the first Social Security check to someone who had never paid into Social Security,
okay. I see.
right, the jig was up immediately. The marketing was, you pay into it, you get out of it. But they immediately started cutting checks for people that had never paid into it. Immediately, because that's what politicians do. And today you have generations, multiple generations of people that are being forced by law to contribute to a program which sucks and which, without significant change, will default. Will default. You're being forced to do it. And anytime someone like me goes, hey, okay, I'll tell you what, we'll still force people to save for retirement, but can we do it like Singapore does, where you actually have different funds? You can just, hey, can we do it like the military does, where you put it into the TSP, the Thrift Savings Program, and it goes into the hey, can we do it like most members of Congress do? Is the response, oh wow, that's an interesting idea. So you're still addressing for the issue of people being able to be solvent in their elderly years.
No, you want to push grandma off the cliff. That's how.
That's what it is. That's what it is every time. You're just a bad guy. You're just an evil guy. You want poor old people to starve. No, I don't. I want politicians to stop manipulating people for their own benefit, because the one group that universally benefits from the government controlling their retirement and their medical care is the politicians who are ultimately in control of those programs. Because if they can now promise you stuff with your own money, all of a sudden they're the good guys. And anybody that points it out is bad and mean and evil and cruel. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. But the entitlement spending is what is going to destroy the budget. Roughly, I think it's 2/3.
All the unfunded
I think
mandates.
At this point, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid alone, which is not all entitlement spending, right?
No.
Just those three items is about 40% of the entire federal budget.
Yeah. So a lot of times when people look at, I want to say like entitlement spending as a whole is actually, I thought it was over 2/3 now, but I could be wrong.
If you give me a minute, I can pull up the
go and
pie
look
chart.
that up. Go and look that up real quick. And the reason for is because a lot of times when we talk about cutting spending, when there's two types of spending, right? You have non-discretionary spending and discretionary spending. Non-discretionary spending is things like Social Security, right? The money has to go into the Social Security fund, or it has to go into Medicare, or it has to go into Medicaid, or things like that. Then you have discretionary. That's like, how much is the defense budget going to be this year? How much money is going to be devoted to certain transportation projects, right? All those that are not non-discretionary.
Yeah, you're right. It's about 2/3.
So about 2/3 of the
Social
budget.
Security, unemployment, labor, Medicare, Medicaid, and then other health-related programs combined. All of that is 2/3 of the entire.
So about
federal
2/3 of the entire federal budget, right, is non-discretionary spending, which means they're not even allowed, like without drastic legislation and whatnot. It's not like they can just change the budget next year and address that. They would have to pass new legislation in order to be able to address a lot of these like systemic issues. And the problem is that because so many of them are entitlements, people have paid into them, they will fight fiercely to protect them, even when the programs are horribly managed, they don't function well, and ultimately they're not solvent. They're not solvent, especially when you're operating especially when your birth rate is at replacement level, barely at replacement levels. Right, and you have more and more people living longer, right, which is a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. We have more and more people living longer, which means when they retire at 65, they're not dying at 72, right? Which means they're now collecting benefits for a much longer period of time. And when you have fewer people in the workforce, because you're not having as many kids, you now have fewer people providing the money for the benefits that are going out to people. And older people in this country are disproportionately more wealthy, and that makes sense. That shouldn't confuse any of us. They've had more time to accumulate wealth over time, usually through property and everything else.
So these young people coming up through who will pretty much never see the benefit of what they're paying into this entire time are also unable to make enough money to gain the wealth that the older people have already, who are going to be.
There is a reason. There are a lot of people that are a little bit older that are looking at younger people going, what the hell is their problem? And look, I do that sometimes too, but I also look at them and like, are you kidding me? Look at the situation, the conditions that they're in right now.
Look at what you guys strap them with.
It's not even like what you guys strapped them with, because not everybody advocated for this. Not everybody wanted this.
No, but we did have like a fairly large swath of folks sort of asleep at the wheel for a long time on this, because even Republicans were making real bad decisions.
Well, it was a very convenient lie. It was a very convenient lie that the government could simply manage your retirement, because after all, they were doing it in other places. Like, we're the only country that doesn't do X. I'm sorry, that's not an argument. That's not an argument. The program either works or it doesn't work. But I don't care how many people are engaging in a crime. Gosh, we're the only, we don't have half the corruption of all these other countries. That would never be used as an argument for we need more corruption, right? It's the same thing with these government programs. You don't get to tell me that this is better simply because more people are doing it. You're right. A lot of people have fallen for the siren song of give the government a lot more power and control over your life and they'll take care of you. And again, the same people that cannot stand politicians, that think they're greedy and that they're selfish and that they're stupid and they don't do a good job, will then immediately and dutifully run to the polls and give them as much power as possible as long as they market the policies correctly. And that's what politics has largely become. It's become a marketing scheme in order to get votes, because votes are the currency. You don't got to produce good results. You just got to make 50% plus one of the population of your district think you've produced good results. And as long as they do, you'll keep getting reelected.
You don't even need to do that. You just need to get 50% plus one
to the polls
to vote for you.
Yeah.
They don't even need to think that you're doing a good job. They just need to vote for you.
Yeah.
And negative partisanship works. You don't even need to run on your own record. You just simply need to say, you need to vote for me because the other guy's worse.
Yeah.
And I've got a fun question that I'll end this with for both of you.
Hey, you
What
did
is-
another question? No fair.
What is, you get to answer it too, Tina.
I'm kidding.
Outside of Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and other entitlements, what's the next largest part of the entire federal
Interest on the
budget?
debt.
I was going to say interest too.
Is interest on the debt. It's not the U.S. Defense Department. It used to be for the longest time that the next largest part of the entire budget
Interest
was the
on
military.
the debt.
Interest on the debt has now eclipsed military spending.
We-
It's $870 billion this year alone.
I had somebody when I was talking to different people working within government services and things like that, and they were frustrated that the state had cut funding for certain positions. And they said, do you think we'll be able to get that funding back? I said, no. And usually that's not, by the way, the proper political response to someone asking you for something like this, like, well, we're going to look into that. We're going to see. That's an interesting point. Whether you think they're going to do it or not, whether you think it's a good idea or not, usually the appropriate response is, we're going to look into that. We're going to see what we can do.
Yeah. Everyone wants honesty until you're honest.
We're going to see what you do. My answer was, no, they're not. Why? I'm like, because we probably don't have the money for it. Well, can we pressure the federal government? I said, you want to know the reason why we don't have the money for it? Right. Because the federal government has engaged in inflationary monetary policy for decades now, and we've been living on a credit card. And so all of these nice sounding things. I said, so you remember when I was a bad, mean, evil dude because I wouldn't vote for the expansion of this program or the expansion of that program? The reason why is because we didn't have money for it. Right. And so what the government was doing was borrowing, taxing, and now printing. Because what happens when because when you can't tax anymore and people don't want to loan to you anymore, you got to resort to printing. So we printed $3 trillion in a relatively short period of time. So now we're living in a hyperinflationary, well, not hyper, but a large inflationary economy. And there's not enough money for all the things that are going around, which means there's not enough money for this position. So yeah, I can call up the federal government and I can say, hey, I'm going to lean on you a little bit in order to provide for this position. They're not going to do it. They can't. And if they do, you're not going to like the result because everything's going to get more expensive in order for them to do it. So this is, I don't know what to say anymore. I don't know what to say anymore. I'm not, if anybody thinks I'm wrong or anybody thinks there's a different explanation, I'd be happy to hear it. But I think the explanation is the government overpromised and is now under-delivering because they don't got the money. So, and now I didn't say all of that directly to her, but I finally looked at her, I said, so if you want the money for that, here's what I want to know. Because we've got representatives from, supervisors and school board and CSBs and, everyone. Who should I take it from? You want this position. You think this position is very important. I'm not debating whether it is or it isn't. But we don't get enough money, so who should I take it? Should I take it from what the school board wants? Should I take it from what the supervisor wants? Should I take it from what these guys want? Where should we get it from? See, nobody wants to say that, at least not in a room where everybody's looking at each other. But this is the difference between reality and political reality. And the political reality was I was just supposed to say, we're going to look into that. We're going to see what we can do. And then if I did manage to get the money for it by stealing it from somebody else, it was supposed to be to lie to those people about why they don't have as much money anymore and to promise them that I'll do the same thing for them next time. Like, that's the way the game is played. And I hate the game, and I refuse to play that game. And one of these days it's going to cost me. Like, one of the days that's going to be it, and I'm done. And that's fine. That's fine. But my gosh, I'm looking at this stuff, and it's amazing the number of highly educated, caring, intelligent people when it comes to their individual role. We're all looking at it like, okay, but the fundamental principle here is if you spend more than you take in, you're going to cause problems. There's going to be issues. You're going to have to pay for that at some point. And then lo and behold, when the debt is called, people are like, how could this have happened? Like, really? Really? It's not how could this have happened. It's how could this not have happened? And how could you have not realized that this would happen? And the answer in many cases is, well, because that other politician that's so much nicer than you told me they'd fix it. Well, I guess their magic wand broke.
This is going to be the thing that will destroy.
Because this is reality. And reality is we can recover from all of this. All of the damage that has been done, we can totally recover from. But it is not going to come from the government playing a larger role in the economy, your life, education, medicine, transportation, none of it. The government has to play a reduced role in all of it if we're actually going to recover. And the bottom line is most people don't want to hear that, because what the government's done over the last several decades is made themselves more and more critical to everybody's daily life, from where their kids are educated, to the daycare that they receive, to the car that they drive, to the business that they work at, to the benefits they receive. And we've gotten to a point where people can't imagine it being done any other way. And the problem is this way was never going to work ultimately. You can go in and plunder something and spend the money and pretend like you're doing something wonderful for people. But if it was all based off of plunder and smoke and mirrors, then at some point the debt's coming. And we're at a point where the debt's here, and the real question is going to be, are people going to associate it with the people that really caused the problem, or are they going to look for very convenient villains that they can demonize, jail, plunder, and eventually turn on each other? Because that's all that'll be left. All right, I think that's all we got time for these questions. Hopefully we address some of the...
This episode was brought to you by Bitcoin, Ethereum, and
Freedom Water.
Gold
Freedom
bars.
Actually, it was brought to you by Good Ranch.
Yeah. No, listen, look, we wanted to have a chance to go through some of these like really good sounding ideas, not for the purpose of, again, straw manning every argument, but from saying, look, this is how a lot of this is marketed. This is why it's marketed that way. And in most cases, they're trying to address a genuine problem, right? It is a genuine problem when a married couple can't make ends meet, or a single mom can't make ends meet and she needs daycare. So what do? It is a genuine problem when people are wondering, what do I do in my retirement years when I can't work anymore? It is a genuine problem when we look at things like, how do we address violence within our streets? All these things are genuine. Right? All of these solutions, so-called solutions, are rooted in something that is genuine, that needs to be addressed. The question is, okay, how do we address it? What's the government's proper role, if any? And here's what I've noticed. Very few people address, especially in politics, very few people address any sort of problem from the standpoint of, is this any of the government's business? They always assume that it is. And the moment they assume that it is, it becomes a hammer, it becomes a nail, they're a hammer. And the only solution is taxes, regulations, restrictions, fines, fees, redistribution, because those are the tools the government has in order to achieve their objectives. When in reality, a lot of what we need is more entrepreneurs. We need more people. We need to make it an easier environment for people to be able to get out there and compete. We need an environment where strong families can flourish. And what we've seen is you don't get that as the government starts to intrude on areas of our lives that it was never meant to be on in the first place. So in many of these cases, the solution is not exclusively to get the government out of the way, but to understand that the real power that exists, that you have in order to improve your own life, does not and should not rest with how effectively you can lobby politicians to take from other people to give to you, or to restrict to other people at your benefit. And likewise, other people shouldn't be doing that at your expense. So much of the problems that we can address here can be addressed by free people working in voluntary cooperation, absent constant government interference. All right, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you found this helpful. We got a lot of other questions. We could have a whole nother episode on the policy subjects that we did not bring up. Maybe we'll do that another time. Once again, thank you very much to Good Ranchers. Go to goodranchers.com. Use promo code Nick. Sign up for one of the subscriptions, and you can get a free Easter ham with your subscription. And I'm telling you, man, it's some of the best meat out there. So go ahead and check it. Once again, thank you very much, and we will see you next episode.